I want you guys to think of one of the hardest things that you've ever had to do. What's one of the hardest things that you've ever had to do? For me, I came this past winter break. So my team, over Christmas break, the week before Christmas, we went to Arizona, and we flew in near the Grand Canyon. And we flew in kind of late, so our plan was the next morning we were going to go and look at the Grand Canyon and do some fun things. But by the time we woke up, we already had a text from two of our coaches, and they were already hiking the Grand Canyon, and they were like, "Hey guys, this is a tough hike. We don't know if you guys should come and do it. Maybe just relax since we have a game tomorrow." And our coaches, they love to do super challenging things, and so we thought they were kind of setting us up for a trap. So they wanted to see if we'd just be lazy and stay in the hotel. So we're like, all right, we'll go hike it. It can't be that hard. They had some of their kids with them. And so we go and we hike the Grand Canyon, and the trail that we went on was about 6 or 7 miles down, and going down was awesome. Like it was super cool. I have some pictures, but just seeing God's creation and just seeing what God has done, it was amazing, and it was so much fun going down. Like we were racing each other. It probably wasn't the best idea because if you've ever hiked the Grand Canyon, it's very narrow, and if you fall off, you're done. Like it just keeps going and going. But it was super fun, and we get to the bottom, and we're kind of hanging out and talking, and then we all kind of look at each other and realize that now we have to hike back up. And hiking back up was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Has anyone hiked the Grand Canyon before? A couple of us? Okay, it was one of the hardest things I've done. It was just very narrow path, super uneven and rocky. You're going up, so you can't even see it, but in the middle of this picture, there's this really small white line. I don't know if you guys can even see that, but that's the trail. So that shows in comparison to everything else how small the trail is. And then you would see this, and you would get above that, and then there's another one, because it was just in layers, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was amazing, though. I would go back tomorrow and do it again if I could, but it was super challenging. And the truth is that life is full of challenging things, and we don't always get to choose if we want them or when they happen, but life is full of challenging things, and I feel like there's kind of two types of people in the world. There's people that love challenging things, and then there's people that don't love challenging things. I don't know which one you are, but we don't always get to choose when the challenging things come. You all are about to start school. I know some of you have already started, and I apologize for that. But for the rest of you, you guys are about to start, and I'm guessing there's a lot of different emotions in the room. I can remember back to when I was a freshman. The freshmen in the room, you guys are probably super nervous, but at the same time, you're super excited. Your head's probably spinning a little bit, not knowing what to expect. The sophomores in the room, you guys are probably like, I'm just glad I'm not a freshman anymore, right? You're moving up the scale a little bit. You juniors are probably happy to be finally be upperclassmen. You guys are starting to drive to school and get to experience what it's like to be the older people in the school. You seniors, I feel like there's also two types of seniors that are super excited, and then seniors that are already done and just ready to move on. The truth is there's a lot of different emotions. However you're feeling about school starting, we can probably all agree that high school is challenging, right? These 4 years are super challenging. You're going to change and grow so much during these years. You're going to have some really high highs. You're also going to have some really low lows. High school, it's amazing, it's fun, but it's also hard and can be pretty challenging. And I think one of the most challenging things for you about high school is continuing to stay strong in your faith and live out your faith during these 4 years, and that's what I want to focus on and talk about tonight. We're going to look at Daniel chapter 1. It's a familiar story probably to most of us, but we're going to look at that story and see how a group of guys responded when they were in a challenging environment. So if you want, you can pull out your phones or Bible apps and find Daniel chapter 1. We're not going to read it all at the very start, but we're going to break it up and read sections at a time and see what we can take away from it. So the first one that we're going to read is Daniel 1, verses 3 through 7. It says, "Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men," he said. Make sure they are well versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They are to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Ananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. So that's where we're going to stop for now. And the first thing that I want us to see is that they experienced change. I don't think that's probably a surprise to you as we read through that text and you can see it. But they experienced a lot of change. For them, literally everything changed. And as we're talking about this story, keep in mind that this group of guys were probably around your age. People think that Daniel was somewhere between 14 and 17 years old. So as we're going through this and everything that they went through, imagine that's happened to you. Put yourself in their shoes. So first, they're removed from their home in Judah, and they're taken as captives to Babylon. This journey, it was a 500-mile trek through harsh conditions. So this wasn't just like a little move trip across town. It's not like going from Greenwood to Franklin. This was 500 miles through harsh conditions. They're going to a place with completely different people, completely different values, completely different ways of life. The Babylonians, they had their own gods. They didn't worship the God that we serve and the God that Daniel and his friends served, but they had their own gods. And King Nebuchadnezzar, what he wanted to do was train all the captives so that they could eventually enter into the royal service. Right? This makes sense because if he's going to have people in his royal service, he wants them to be like him, right? If you're going to have someone work for you, you want them to understand your ways of doing things. And so the king, he focused on 3 major areas in his goal to make all these captives Babylonians. He tried to change the way that they thought, he tried to change their identity and their loyalty, and he tried to change their lifestyle. He was trying to change the way that they thought by giving them a Babylonian education. So basically, they were brainwashing them. They tried to get them to think the same way that they all thought, to believe the same things that they thought. They wanted them to be Babylonian. The next thing, they were trying to change their lifestyle by changing their diet. So they got food from the king, and they wanted them to eat that, and that's a big part of this story, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But they were also trying to change their identity and their loyalty by changing their names. Does anyone in here know what your name means? Does anyone want to share? What's your name mean? I couldn't hear that, but I trust that some people heard that. Anybody else know what your name means? Yeah. Okay. Oh, nice. Very nice. So my name, I literally Googled this before I came, so I didn't know this before today. My name's Spencer, in case you guys don't know, and it means steward or administrator, so very exciting there. But for us today, our names, the meaning of our names don't mean a whole lot, right? Most of you probably don't even know what your name means. It's cool to kind of know and be able to talk about it, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot. But for people back then, this was a huge deal. Your name went into your identity. It was a part of who you were at the core. And I think it's interesting just to look at their names and when they switched their names. So their Babylonian name, we don't know exactly what it means, but this is what scholars believe it means. So Daniel, his name means God is my judge, while his new name, Belteshazzar, means Bel, protect his life. And Bel is like the main Babylonian god. Ananiah means the Lord shows grace, while Shadrach means under the command of Aku, which was a moon god. Mishael is who is like God, while Meshach is who is like Aku. Azariah, the Lord helps, and Abednego, servant of Nego, which was a god of learning and writing. So they weren't just changing their names, but they were trying to change who they were at the very core. They were trying to change everything about these group of guys. Everything was changing for them. They experienced a ton of change. We can see that. But the reality of the situation is you all are about to experience a lot of change as well. Maybe not in the same ways that they did, but you're about to experience a lot of change when you go back to school. You're about to walk into a culture that's completely different than what you've been used to during the summer. the same way that Daniel walked into a culture that was completely foreign and different for him. For you guys, your schedule is going to look a lot different. You're not going to have all day to pick and choose what you want to do. I know my brother, he sleeps in until about noon every day, so that's going to change for him, but your schedule is going to change. It's going to look different. Your priorities are going to look a lot different. All of a sudden, you're going to have projects, you're going to have quizzes and tests, your extracurricular activities are going to pick up. You're going to have a lot more on your plate. Your priorities are going to change. Your environment's going to change. You're not going to get to go where you want and pick and choose where you spend your time, but you're going to be at school for 7 hours of the day. Your environment, your surroundings are going to look a lot different. And the people that you're surrounded by are going to look a lot different. Again, you're not going to get to pick and choose who you spend time with because you're going to be at school and there's going to be a lot of people that you're going to be around that you haven't been around in a long time. Things are going to change for you, and this is your Babylon, right? Your school is your Babylon because you're going to a place where everything has changed for how you've been living the past few months. You're about to walk into a completely different culture. You're going to be surrounded by people that for the majority of think a lot different than you, talk a lot different than you, believe things a lot different than you, do things and live lives a lot different than the way that you do. I could go on, but I want you to understand, and I think you understand, that things are going to change when you go back to school. You're not going to have hours of free time every day that makes it easy to find time to spend with Jesus. You're not going to get to choose who you're around. The majority of people, when you go back to school, are going to have different values. They're going to have different priorities, different motives, different agendas than you do. Daniel, Ananias, Mishael, Azariah, they experienced a lot of change. And as we move through this story, we're going to see how they responded and lived with all this change. So they're taken to this different place. They're basically forced to change, right? Change in 3 different ways: how they think, their lifestyle, and then their identity and loyalty. And then we move on to verse 8, and it says, "But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods." So the second thing that I want us to see is that they stayed strong in their faith. They stayed strong in their faith. They chose not to eat the food. And at first, the chief of staff, he wasn't going to let them do this. Daniel asked if he could not eat the food, and he said, "No, I can't let you do that." But Daniel, in this moment, he was determined to not do this, and so he did some negotiating, and eventually the chief of staff let them avoid eating the food. Despite everything that was happening, everything that had changed, they remained strong in their faith. They didn't conform to the ways of the Babylonians. They didn't do what everyone else was doing. They didn't give in to the peer pressure or the temptation. They didn't conform, but they stayed strong in their faith, and they chose to do what they felt was the right thing to do. They didn't eat the food, and there's a few different ideas about this, but the reason that most people believe is because if they accepted the food, it would have showed them accepting the friendship of the king and relying on the king. And so Daniel, he decided that he wasn't going to rely on the king, but he was going to rely solely on God. It says that Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food. He was determined. He understood the situation, and he decided in his heart what the right thing to do was, and he wasn't going to let anything change his mind. And now for us, Jesus says that we aren't defiled by what goes into our body, but what comes from our heart. And in Mark chapter 7, it says, "It is what comes from inside that defiles you. For from within, out of a person's heart, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these vile things come from within. They are what defile you." Jesus says that what defiles us, what corrupts us, what pollutes us, is what comes from the inside. The choices that we make, the things we do, the words we say, these are the things that defile us. This school year, choose to stay strong in your faith. Choose to do the right thing. Choose to do what you know is right. Choose to do the God-honoring thing. When you walk into the class and everyone is cheating, don't defile yourself. Stay strong. Do what you know is right. At lunch, when everyone is making inappropriate jokes, don't defile yourself. Don't join in, but do what you know is right. When people are spreading rumors and talking behind someone's back, don't defile yourself. When everyone's disrespecting the teacher, especially the substitute teacher, don't defile yourself. Stay strong in your faith. Choose to do the right thing. Choose to live out your faith rather than conforming to the culture that you're around and doing what everyone else is doing. And here's another important part to this. Daniel, he decided in advance to say no to the food, right? He didn't wait for the platter to be brought with the big juicy steak and the glass of wine. I don't know if it's steak, but he didn't wait for that food to be in front of him to say no. But he said no in advance. And we have to draw the line now. We have to say no to the temptation before it comes. Decide how you're going to respond in those situations before you're ever in the situation. Because it's a lot easier to say no now than when you're faced with the temptation in the moment. So choose now how you respond to those. Choose now to stay strong in your faith and do what you know is right. As we continue to move through this story, we're going to look at verses 11 through 16. It says, Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Ananias, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. And so after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. Here's the last thing that I want us to see, is that they did it together. They did it together. When I read this story, I couldn't help but just be attracted to the fact that they were all in this together. They were all doing the same thing together. Just look at this. Daniel says, please test us. He says, see how we look compared to the younger men. Daniel, he agreed to Daniel's suggestion and he tested them. Daniel and his 3 friends. The attendant fed them only vegetables and water. When I read this, I can't help but noticing they did it together. It wasn't just one of them, but they were all in this doing the same thing together. It's a lot easier to do hard things when you do it with other people. So when we go back to school, my team, we have different strength tests just to see like how we've been working over the summer. And one of those things is a 5-minute plank. Planking is one of my least favorite things. I view it as a form of torture. I hate it. If you don't know what planking is, you're like on your forearms and your toes and you just have to hold there. It's terrible. I hate it. And I'm terrible at it. I'm not good. If you told me to go in a room right now and do a plank, I think I could last 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 if I really wanted to, but that's about it. But this last, and I've never got a 5-minute plank in my life, but this last fall was the first time that I got the 5-minute mark. Yeah. And that was because my whole team was around me. We were all doing it together. We were encouraging each other. We were pushing each other on. We were yelling at each other, but we were all doing it together. And it made it a little bit easier than if I were trying to do it by myself. And the same is true when we're following Jesus. Following Jesus is hard, but it's a whole lot harder when you try to do it on your own. And here's the thing, we weren't created to go through life alone. Part of what it means to be created in the image of God is that we were designed to be in relationships with other people. We're designed to be in relationships with other people. You will not fully become who you're supposed to be, the person that God has created you to be, until you're in relationships with other people. If you want to be the person God has created you to be, if you want to grow in your relationship with God, if you want to resist temptation, if you want to stay strong in your faith this year, then you have to do it with other people. Don't try to do it alone. Don't try to follow Jesus on your own. My challenge, my encouragement, my advice is to get plugged into your small group. Get plugged into that small group. If you're serious about growing in your faith and staying strong in your faith this school year, then get plugged into that community. For me, when I went off to college, one of the things that I missed the most was my small group. All of a sudden, I didn't have that close group of guys that I knew cared for me, that I knew loved me, that I knew I could go for anything. When I needed something, when I screwed up, I didn't have that strong group of guys that I could rely on. And if I could go back in high school just to relive any part, I would go back to relive my small group times. My high school small group had a huge impact and role in changing my life and helping me grow closer to becoming the person that I want to be. Don't try to do it on your own. Find accountability partners, get plugged into your community, do life, follow Jesus with other people. Change is on its way. For some of you, it's already begun. For others, it's right around the corner. Summer, it's awesome, but it's coming to an end and school is starting. But how will you respond when you walk into your Babylon? When you walk into a culture that's completely different than the one that you've experienced this summer? When you're surrounded by people who the majority of don't follow Jesus, will you still live out your faith and stay strong? When everyone around you is defiling themselves, will you stay strong in your faith and continue to do what you know is right? When you no longer have the free time that you had in the summer with homework and extracurricular activities, will you still make the time to put God first and make him your priority? My encouragement, my challenge is to stay strong in your faith this school year. Choose to live for Jesus and glorify him by the way that you live as you guys go back to school. And just for a second, imagine if everyone in here did this. If we all did this, you guys would change the culture of your schools. Just imagine if God used you and your friends to change your whole school. He could do that. He could use you to change your school. The bottom line is that change is on the way. Choose to stay strong and do so in community.